March 15, 1987, Beverly Hills Hotel. Vincent Torino had humiliated actors for 20 years, but tonight would be different. Sylvester Stallone stood on that glittering ballroom stage, 200 Hollywood elites watching. Vincent had just torn apart his script, his acting, his very existence in front of every power player in town. Then Stallone walked to the microphone. What he said in the next 90 seconds didn't just destroy Vincent Torino's career. It buried secrets that 3 decades couldn't keep hidden. Phone calls were made before the valet brought cars around. Deals were canceled by morning. Studios went silent. But Vincent never knew the real reason his empire crumbled that night. Never knew who was really pulling the strings. Never knew that Stallone's words were just the opening move in a game that started years before, in a place Vincent thought no one would ever look. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Hook. 35 years later, Vincent Torino still woke up in cold sweats, remembering the sound of Stallone's voice cutting through the Beverly Hills Hotel's crystal chandeliers like a blade through silk. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, 35 years to the day after that night. Vincent's arthritic fingers trembled as he signed for it, the delivery man's eyes lingering too long on the peeling paint of the Malibu mansion's front door. Another creditor, probably. Another reminder that the empire he'd built on fear and intimidation had crumbled to dust in unpaid bills. But this wasn't a bill. The unmarked box sat on his kitchen counter like a coiled snake, no return address, just his name written in block letters that made his stomach clench with recognition he couldn't quite place. Vincent poured 3 fingers of bourbon, his breakfast routine for the past decade, and stared at the package while the Pacific Ocean crashed against the rocks below his deteriorating deck. He'd been hiding in this house since 1989, watching his Hollywood kingdom collapse from a distance. The phone calls had stopped first, then the invitations, then the money. By 1990, Vincent "Sly" Torino, the producer who once made studio heads grovel, couldn't get a meeting with a junior development executive. The box seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Vincent's hands shook as he tore away the brown paper. Inside, nestled in black foam, lay a single VHS tape and a photograph. The photo made his blood freeze. Himself on that Beverly Hills Hotel stage, microphone in hand, mouth twisted in the cruel smile he'd perfected while destroying careers. But it wasn't a publicity shot. The angle was wrong, taken from the audience, catching him mid-sneer as he eviscerated the young actor whose name he'd tried so hard to forget, Michael Castellano. The tape was labeled in the same block handwriting, "The Real Story." March 15, 1987. Vincent's bourbon glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the Italian marble he could no longer afford to maintain. Impossible. Every recording device had been confiscated that night. He'd made sure of it, called in favors, paid bribes, threatened lawsuits. The Torino machine had scrubbed that evening from existence, leaving only whispered rumors and carefully managed silence. Yet here it was. His hands moved without conscious thought, sliding the tape into the ancient VCR he kept for old dailies. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly he was back in that glittering ballroom, watching his younger self prowl the stage like a predator savoring its kill. On screen, Vincent's voice boomed through the hotel's sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a special treat. Young Michael Castellano here thinks he's ready for the big leagues. Thinks his pretty face and East Coast theater training make him the next Pacino." The camera panned across the audience. Studio heads, agents, list actors, all waiting to see blood spilled on marble floors. Vincent remembered the intoxicating rush of absolute power, the delicious moment before he destroyed another dreamer's soul in front of Hollywood royalty. But as he watched now, something was wrong. The camera lingered on faces he hadn't noticed that night, revealing expressions that made his skin crawl. They weren't enjoying the show. They were waiting, watching him with the cold patience of vultures circling carrion. On screen, Michael Castellano took the microphone with steady hands. 23 years old, dark hair slicked back, wearing a tuxedo that had probably cost him 3 months' rent. Vincent had expected tears, stammering, maybe a desperate plea for mercy. Instead, Michael smiled. "Mr. Torino is right about one thing," the young actor said. his voice carrying perfectly through the ballroom's acoustics. "Tonight is special, because tonight you're all going to learn something about the man who's been pulling your strings for 20 years. Vincent's blood turned to ice water. On the tape, his younger self looked confused, still drunk on his own cruelty. He'd had no idea what was coming. "Tell them about Catalina Island, Vincent," Michael continued, the microphone catching every syllable. "Tell them about the summer of 1967. Tell them about Elena Vasquez." The name hit Vincent like a physical blow. He stumbled backward from the television, his vision blurring. Elena. God, not Elena. That secret had died with her, buried in scandal sheets and police reports that no longer existed. He'd made sure of that, too. But Michael Castellano had known. Somehow, impossibly, the kid had known. On screen, the ballroom erupted in whispers as Vincent's younger self stood frozen, the color draining from his face like water from a broken dam. Phone calls were already being made from the audience, deals canceled with quick whispered words to assistants. The tape ended abruptly, leaving Vincent alone with the sound of his own ragged breathing and the crash of waves that might as well have been the applause of his own destruction. A note had been tucked beneath the VHS case. "Your daughter doesn't know the truth yet, but she will, unless you do exactly what I say. Check your email. You have 48 hours. MC." If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat and you want to see how Vincent's dark past finally catches up to him, make sure you're subscribed and following along. Tomorrow we dive deeper into the twisted game that's been 35 years in the making, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Vincent's legs gave out, and he collapsed into the leather chair that had once commanded his corner office at Torino Productions. Now it sat in his kitchen like a monument to fallen empire, its burgundy surface cracked and faded from years of salt air. The note crumpled in his trembling fist as Elena Vasquez's face materialized in his mind. 19 years old, dark eyes bright with ambition, floating face down in the tide pools of Catalina Island 40 years ago. His daughter. Christ, his daughter. Vincent's hands fumbled for his phone, muscle memory dialing a number he'd called every Sunday for the past 5 years. It rang 3 times before her voice filled the empty kitchen like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Hi, Dad. Sophia." Her name came out as a whisper, barely audible over the waves battering his foundation. "How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm good. Just finished my morning run along the Charles. Boston's beautiful this time of year." Her voice carried that gentle warmth she'd inherited from her mother. Her real mother, not Elena. "Never, Elena. You sound tired. Are you eating?" Vincent closed his eyes, picturing her in her Cambridge apartment, probably still in running clothes, PhD dissertation spread across her kitchen table. 28 years old and brilliant as a diamond, teaching literature at Harvard while finishing her doctorate on the psychological themes in classical tragedy. The irony of that wasn't lost on him. "I'm fine. Just wanted to hear your voice." "Dad." Her tone shifted, taking on the careful concern she'd learned to use with him over the years. "Are you drinking this early? It's barely noon." The bourbon glass lay in pieces at his feet, amber liquid seeping into grout lines between marble tiles that had cost more than most people's cars. He'd bought this house in 1975, when his name alone could greenlight a $50 million picture. Now it was falling apart around him like everything else, the deck railing corroded by salt spray, paint peeling from window frames, the infinity pool cracked and drained. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Tell me about your day." She launched into an animated description of her graduate seminar on revenge narratives in Greek drama, her voice bright with the passion that had carried her through Yale undergrad and into Harvard's ivory towers. Vincent had insisted on paying every penny of her education, even as his own world crumbled. Sophia was the only pure thing he'd ever created, the only part of his legacy that wasn't built on broken dreams and buried secrets. "We're examining how Medea's revenge consumes not just her enemies, but herself," she was saying. "The way trauma creates these cyclical patterns of destruction that echo across generations. It's fascinating how—" She stopped abruptly. "Sorry, I'm rambling. You probably don't want to hear about ancient Greek psychology." "I want to hear everything," Vincent said, and meant it. Her voice was an anchor in the storm that Michael Castellano had just unleashed. "You're going to change how people understand these stories, Sophia. Your mother would be so proud." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of a woman who died when Sophia was 3. Cancer, swift and merciless, taking away the only person who'd ever loved Vincent without condition. Margaret had known about his past, some of it anyway, but she'd seen something worth saving in him. Their daughter had her mother's capacity for forgiveness, her ability to find light in dark places. "I love you, Dad," Sophia said softly. "Whatever's going on, whatever you're not telling me, you know I'm here, right? We're a team." The words hit him like a physical blow. She had no idea that her father had once been Hollywood's most feared predator, that he'd built his empire by destroying dreams and breaking spirits. She'd grown up believing he was just another producer who'd fallen from grace, a cautionary tale about the industry's fickleness. The truth about Elena Vasquez, about that summer of 1967, about the things he'd done in the shadows while cameras rolled, none of it existed in her world. "I know, sweetheart. I love you too." After she hung up, Vincent sat in the gathering silence of his kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of his former life. Awards gathering dust on shelves, framed photos from premieres where he'd stood next to stars whose careers he'd later destroyed, contracts for deals that had made him millions while leaving others with nothing. The computer in his study would have an email waiting. 48 hours to comply with whatever Michael Castellano wanted, or Sophia would learn the truth about the monster who'd raised her with Shakespeare quotes and bedtime stories. Vincent hauled himself to his feet, glass crunching under his shoes, and shuffled toward the hallway. The afternoon sun streamed through salt-stained windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts in the stale air. 35 years ago, he'd thought he'd buried his past deep enough that it would never surface. He'd been wrong. The email. The study door creaked on hinges that hadn't seen oil in years, opening into Vincent's personal mausoleum. Dust sheets covered most of the furniture like burial shrouds, but the mahogany desk remained exposed, a massive monument to his former power that had once commanded meetings worth hundreds of millions. Now it held only a cheap laptop he'd bought at Best Buy 3 years ago when his accountant finally convinced him that email wasn't optional anymore. The leather chair groaned under his weight as Vincent settled behind the desk, staring at the laptop's black screen. His reflection stared back, hollow cheeks, silver stubble, eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. The man who'd once made grown men weep with a single phone call now looked like exactly what he was, a broken hermit hiding from his sins. His finger hovered over the power button. Once he opened that email, there would be no going back. Michael Castellano had waited 35 years for this moment, had planned it down to the anniversary date. Whatever he wanted, it wouldn't be money. Vincent barely had enough left to keep the utilities on. No, this was about something far more valuable. Something that would destroy what little remained of Vincent's world. The screen flickered to life, windows booting with mechanical indifference. Vincent's hands shook as he opened his email client, watching the inbox refresh. Most of the messages were automated. Final notices from creditors, property tax warnings from Los Angeles County, spam promising miracle cures for erectile dysfunction and loneliness. But there, at the top, was an email from an address that made his stomach clench. macastellano1987@protonmail.com. The subject line read, "Catalina Island, Final Act." Vincent clicked it open, his vision tunneling as words filled the screen in that same methodical block font. "Vincent, I hope you enjoyed the preview. The complete recording runs 4 hours and includes some delightful behind-the-scenes footage from that summer of 1967. Did you really think Elena's camera crew only shot promotional stills? The girl was ambitious. She documented everything. Your daughter seems lovely, by the way. I attended her lecture at Harvard last month, Inherited Trauma in Classical Literature. Ironic topic, considering. She has your eyes but her mother's heart. It would be a shame if she learned that her father's fortune was built on more than just Hollywood ruthlessness. Your instructions are simple. Tomorrow, March 16th, you will attend the unveiling of the restored Castellano Theater in downtown Los Angeles. Yes, I bought it back, renovated it, renamed it. The ceremony begins at 8 p.m. You will sit in the front row, seat 14. The same seat my father occupied the night you destroyed his life and drove him to an early grave. You will listen to every word of my speech. You will smile when the cameras capture your face. And when I invite you on stage, because I will, you will walk up there like the showman you once were and play your final scene. The theater will be full of industry people. Some you'll recognize, some you won't. But they'll all be recording. Everyone has phones now, Vincent. Everything lives forever on the internet. Refuse. And tomorrow's Los Angeles Times will run a front-page expose about Elena Vasquez's death and her unborn child. Your daughter will learn that her Harvard education was paid for with blood money, that the man she loves is a predator who covered up murder. Don't disappoint me. I've been preparing this performance for 35 years. Break a leg, Michael. P.S. I know you're wondering how I found out about Catalina. Elena kept a diary, Vincent. Amazing what turns up when you know the right private investigators and have unlimited patience. The statute of limitations on murder never expires. Vincent's chair rolled backward as he lurched to his feet, bile burning his throat. The room spun around him like a carnival ride, decades of carefully constructed lies crumbling in real time. Elena's diary. Jesus Christ, Elena's diary. He'd searched for it after her death, tearing apart her apartment while the police investigated the accidental drowning. He'd assumed it had been lost, or maybe never existed at all, but Michael Castellano had found it, had somehow tracked down the one piece of evidence that could link Vincent to Elena's murder and the disposal of her body in those tide pools. The unborn child. Vincent's hands flew to his mouth as the words registered fully. Elena had been pregnant. 8 weeks along, according to the coroner's report he'd buried with bribes and threats. His child, another child, had died with her in those cold Pacific waters. Vincent stumbled to the window overlooking the ocean, watching waves crash against the rocks where he'd once stood with Elena, promising her stardom in exchange for silence about their affair. She'd been 19 and fearless, threatening to expose not just their relationship, but the other young actresses he'd coerced over the years. A pattern of predatory behavior that would have destroyed him even in 1967's more forgiving Hollywood. So he'd made it all go away. One push in the dark, her surprised cry swallowed by the sound of waves, and Vincent Torino's secrets had been safe for 35 years. Until now. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "See you tomorrow night, Vincent. Don't keep your audience waiting." Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Pacific like an approaching army, and Vincent realized that Michael Castellano had just handed him a script for his own destruction. Early development. Vincent stared at his phone screen until the text message blurred into meaningless pixels. His first instinct was to hurl the device against the wall, watch it explode into 1,000 pieces like everything else in his life. Instead, he set it down with the careful precision of a man defusing a bomb. This wasn't happening, couldn't be happening. Michael Castellano was probably dead by now, overdosed in some fleabag motel or wasted away in obscurity like all the other dreams Vincent had crushed. That's what happened to broken actors. They disappeared into the shadows of strip mall theaters and dinner playhouses, their names forgotten by an industry that devoured fresh meat daily. But the Castellano Theater. Vincent's memory stirred like sediment in dark water. Antonio Castellano had owned that place, a beautiful Art Deco palace downtown that had hosted legitimate theater when Hollywood still pretended to have class. The old man had been so proud of it, had brought his son Michael there every weekend to watch rehearsals and dream of spotlights. Vincent reached for his laptop again, fingers moving automatically to Google. The search results made his stomach drop through the floor. There it was in pristine digital clarity. Historic Castellano Theater restoration complete after $15 million investment. The article was dated 3 months ago, complete with photos of a gleaming marquee and a quote from the mysterious new owner about honoring the dreams that built this place. $15 million. Vincent's entire net worth at his peak hadn't reached half that amount. Whoever Michael Castellano had become, he'd found resources that dwarfed anything Vincent had ever commanded. The laptop snapped shut with a sound like breaking bones. Vincent needed help, real help, the kind that required calling in favors he'd spent decades avoiding. His phone buzzed again. Not a text this time, but an actual call from a number that made his blood freeze. The display showed only a name, Marty Goldstein, ICM. Vincent hadn't spoken to his former agent in 15 years. Not since Marty had quietly dropped him after the offers stopped coming. But Marty knew everyone, had survived 4 decades in Hollywood by never forgetting anything and never burning bridges completely. If anyone could tell him about Michael Castellano's resurrection, it would be Marty. Vincent? Marty's voice sounded older, careful. Jesus, I thought you were dead. Not yet. Vincent tried for his old charm, the easy confidence that had once made studio heads return his calls within minutes. It came out hollow and desperate. Marty, I need to ask you about someone. Michael Castellano. Ring any bells? The silence stretched so long, Vincent wondered if the call had dropped. When Marty finally spoke, his voice had changed completely, tight with something that might have been fear. Why are you asking about him? Just curious. Heard he was back in town, thought maybe. Vincent, listen to me very carefully. Marty's words came fast, urgent. Whatever business you think you have with Michael Castellano, walk away. Right now. Pack a bag and drive to Mexico if you have to, but stay away from that man. The fear in Marty's voice was infectious, crawling under Vincent's skin like cold fingers. What are you talking about? He was nobody, a failed actor with daddy issues. That was 35 years ago. Marty's breathing was audible through the phone. You have no idea what he became after you destroyed him. The money, the connections, the people who owe him favors. He's not the kid you humiliated anymore, Vincent. He's something else entirely. Such as? Another pause, longer this time. I can't talk about this over the phone. Meet me at Musso's in an hour. Back booth, cash only, and Vincent, come alone. The line went dead, leaving Vincent staring at his phone like it had just grown fangs. Marty Goldstein had represented A-list talent for 4 decades, had negotiated deals with cartel money and Russian oligarchs. Nothing scared Marty. Nothing except Michael Castellano. Vincent's hands were shaking as he grabbed his keys from the kitchen counter, stepping carefully around the broken glass that glittered like diamonds in the afternoon light. Outside, his 15-year-old BMW coughed to life, the engine rattling with mechanical arthritis. The car had been a gift to himself after his last successful production, a small-budget thriller that had earned back its investment and nothing more. It was the final punctuation mark on a career that had once moved mountains. As he pulled out of his driveway, Vincent caught a glimpse of movement in his rearview mirror. A black sedan sat parked across the street, tinted windows reflecting the dying sun like dead eyes. It hadn't been there when he'd arrived home with Michael's package. The sedan followed him down Pacific Coast Highway, maintaining a careful distance that screamed professional surveillance. Vincent's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white, muscle memory from 1,000 Hollywood chase scenes providing no comfort in the real thing. By the time he reached Hollywood Boulevard, 3 more cars had joined the convoy. Vincent Torino was no longer just hiding from his past. His past had found him, surrounded him, and was herding him toward a theater where his final performance waited. Middle development. Musso and Frank Grill squatted on Hollywood Boulevard like a time capsule from an era when the industry still had pretensions of dignity. Vincent pushed through the heavy wooden doors, inhaling the familiar cocktail of aged leather, cigarette ghosts, and broken dreams that had seasoned these walls for nearly a century. The hostess, a skeletal woman with surgical precision cheekbones, led him past booths where studio executives once carved up careers over martinis and handshake deals. Marty Goldstein sat hunched in the back corner booth like a gargoyle guarding secrets. 68 years old and wearing a $1,000 suit that couldn't hide the tremor in his hands, Marty had the haunted look of a man who'd spent too many years trading in other people's souls. 2 untouched martinis sat between them like peace offerings to ghosts. You look like hell, Vincent. Marty's voice carried the rasp of 4 decades of Cuban cigars and whispered threats. But I suppose that's what happens when you've been dead for 15 years. Vincent slid into the booth, noting how Marty's eyes kept darting toward the restaurant's entrance. The great Marty Goldstein, who'd once stared down Harvey Weinstein and made him blink, was terrified. Tell me about Castellano. First, tell me why you want to know. Marty's fingers drummed against the table like a pianist warming up for a funeral dirge. Because if this is about what I think it's about, you're already dead. You just haven't stopped breathing yet. The words hit Vincent like ice water. Through the restaurant's windows, he could see the black sedan parked across the street, its occupants patient as vultures. He contacted me about the old days. Marty's face went gray as week-old newspaper. He reached for his martini with shaking hands, drained half of it in one desperate gulp. Jesus Christ, Vincent, what did you do to him? And don't give me some Hollywood bullshit about creative differences. I know you. I know what you were capable of back then. The truth sat between them like a loaded gun. Vincent had never told anyone about Elena Vasquez. Not Marty, not Margaret, not the expensive lawyers who'd made her death disappear into bureaucratic limbo. Some secrets were too toxic even for Hollywood's industrial-strength appetite for scandal. I destroyed his career, publicly, at the Beverly Hills Hotel in front of everyone who mattered. The words tasted like copper and regret. He was young, ambitious, thought he could threaten me. So you broke him. Marty nodded grimly. Classic Vincent Torino. But that's not why you're sitting here looking like a condemned man, is it? There's more. Vincent stared into his untouched martini, watching olive brine swirl like storm clouds. 35 years of silence, and now the dam was cracking. There was a girl, an actress. She died that same year. Marty went very still. The ambient noise of the restaurant, clinking glasses, hushed conversations, the rattle of ice in shakers, seemed to fade until only their breathing remained audible. When Marty spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Elena Vasquez, the one who drowned off Catalina. The confirmation hit Vincent like a physical blow. If Marty knew, if Marty had always known, then others did too. The careful architecture of lies he'd built around Elena's death was crumbling in real time. How long have you known? I've suspected for 35 years. Knew for certain when Castellano started making moves 6 months ago. Marty leaned forward, his expensive cologne unable to mask the smell of fierce sweat. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Vincent. After you destroyed him, he disappeared for 2 years, completely off the grid. When he surfaced again, he wasn't an actor anymore. What was he? A problem solver, for people with more money than God and fewer scruples than Satan. Marty's voice dropped even lower. Oil executives who needed environmental activists to stop asking questions. Tech billionaires with inconvenient whistleblowers. Politicians with primary challengers who couldn't take a hint. The restaurant suddenly felt airless, claustrophobic. Vincent's vision tunneled as the implications crashed over him like a riptide. You're saying he's a killer. I'm saying he's a businessman who specializes in permanent solutions to difficult problems. The money he used to restore that theater? Blood money, Vincent. Decades of it. And now he's decided to solve his oldest problem, you. Vincent's phone buzzed against the table. Another text message from that unknown number. Enjoying dinner? The salmon looks fresh tonight. Give my regards to Marty. Both men looked toward the restaurant windows. The sedan was still there, but now Vincent could see a figure in the passenger seat holding something that caught the streetlight. Binoculars, or a telephoto lens. He's watching us. Vincent's voice came out strangled, barely human. Right now, he's watching us. Marty was already standing, throwing cash on the table with hands that shook like autumn leaves. This conversation never happened. I never saw you. And Vincent? He paused at the booth's edge, his face carved with 35 years of accumulated regret. Whatever he wants you to do tomorrow night, you do it. Because the alternative isn't exile or bankruptcy or professional humiliation. The alternative is a hole in the ground that your daughter will never find. Vincent sat frozen in the booth as Marty disappeared into the restaurant's maze of tables, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and existential terror. The text message glowed on his phone screen like a malignant star. Give my regards to Marty. How had Michael known they were meeting? How had he known about the salmon special, about this specific booth, about conversations that should have been impossible to overhear from across the street? The answer crept up Vincent's spine like ice water. The phone, his own goddamn phone. With shaking fingers, he powered down the device, but the damage was already done. Every call, every location, every desperate Google search, Michael had been listening to all of it. For how long? Days? Weeks? The thought of those invisible ears cataloging his decline, recording his pathetic attempts at damage control, made Vincent's skin crawl with phantom insects. But that wasn't the revelation that shattered his world. That came when he replayed Marty's words, "I've suspected for 35 years. Knew for certain when Castellano started making moves 6 months ago. 6 months ago." Vincent's mind raced backward through the calendar like a film reel in reverse. 6 months ago, Margaret had died. His ex-wife, his daughter's mother, the one person who'd known about Elena Vasquez and kept the secret buried deeper than Jimmy Hoffa. Margaret had been dying of pancreatic cancer for 3 months before Vincent even learned about it. Christina had called him from Mass General, her voice raw with grief and accusation. "She's asking for you, Dad. I don't know why, but she wants to see you before." He'd driven through the night from Los Angeles to Boston, arriving at the hospital to find Margaret reduced to a skeleton wrapped in hospital gowns. But her eyes, those intelligent gray eyes that had once seen through every lie he'd ever told, were still sharp as surgical steel. "Vincent." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the beeping machines an antiseptic stench with laser precision. "I need to tell you something. About Elena." His blood had frozen in his veins. They'd never spoken Elena's name aloud, not in 23 years of marriage, not during the divorce proceedings, not even when Christina asked about her half-siblings she'd never know. It was their shared cancer, metastasizing in silence. "Don't." He'd glanced toward the hallway where Christina waited with her laptop, grading papers to cope with her mother's approaching death. "She doesn't need to know." "She already knows." Margaret's laugh was like breaking glass. "Do you think I could live with you for 23 years and not see the guilt eating you alive? Every time you looked at Christina, every birthday party, every graduation, you were seeing the child you killed." The words had hit him like a sledgehammer. Elena's unborn baby, 8 weeks along, according to the coroner's report he'd tried so hard to forget. "How long have you known?" "Since our honeymoon." Margaret's monitors had started beeping faster, her heart rate spiking with ancient fury. "You talked in your sleep, Vincent. About Catalina Island, about tide pools, about a girl who threatened to expose what you really were." Vincent had staggered backward, his legs hitting the visitor's chair. 23 years. She'd known for 23 years and said nothing, had borne his daughter and built a life on the foundation of his deepest shame. Why? The question came out broken, barely human. "Why did you stay?" Margaret's smile had been terrible in its serenity. "Because I was pregnant too, and because I knew that someday someone would come for you. I wanted to be there to watch." She'd died 2 days later, taking her secrets to the grave. Or so Vincent had thought. Now, sitting in Musso's with the ghost of Marty's terror still hanging in the air, Vincent understood the truth that had been staring at him for 6 months. Margaret hadn't taken their secrets to the grave. She'd taken them to Michael Castellano. The timeline snapped into focus with horrifying clarity. Margaret's final hospital stay, Michael's sudden acquisition of Elena's diary, the perfectly timed restoration of the Castellano Theater. Even the email address, mcastellano1987@protonmail.com, was a breadcrumb trail leading back to the night Vincent had destroyed a young actor's dreams. Margaret had orchestrated it all. His dying ex-wife had spent her final months setting up his destruction, feeding information to the one person with both motive and resources to finish what she'd started 23 years ago. Vincent's phone buzzed once more before the screen went dark. A final message from Michael Castellano. "She wanted you to know it was her idea." "Sweet dreams, Vincent." Outside, the black sedan pulled away from the curb and disappeared into Hollywood traffic, its work complete. Vincent Torino sat alone in the gathering darkness, finally understanding that his greatest enemy had been sleeping beside him for decades, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The theater tomorrow night wasn't Michael's trap. It was Margaret's. Vincent sat motionless in the booth for 20 minutes after the sedan disappeared, his mind reeling through 35 years of carefully constructed lies now collapsing like a house of cards in an earthquake. Margaret's final words echoed in his skull. "I wanted to be there to watch." Even in death, she was getting her wish. The waitress approached twice to refill his water glass, her practiced smile faltering at the sight of his 1,000-yard stare. Vincent looked like a man who'd seen his own grave being dug, which, he supposed, he had. The drive back to Malibu passed in a fugue state. Streetlights blurred past like dying stars, and Vincent found himself taking surface roads instead of the freeway, some primitive instinct warning him away from enclosed spaces where black sedans could box him in. His phone remained powered off, a digital corpse in his jacket pocket. By the time he reached his crumbling mansion, the Pacific had swallowed the sun whole, leaving only the skeletal outline of his former kingdom silhouetted against a starless sky. The house felt different now, not like a refuge but like a mausoleum, every shadow pregnant with Margaret's posthumous laughter. Vincent poured 3 fingers of bourbon, then doubled it. The alcohol burned away some of the numbness, replacing it with something worse, clarity. Margaret had known everything, every secret, every compromise, every moment of weakness that had built his empire and destroyed his soul. She'd catalogued it all with the patience of a coroner, waiting for the perfect moment to perform the autopsy. His hands were steadier now as he powered on his phone. The screen lit up with 17 missed calls from Christina, each one a hammer blow to his already fractured conscience. His daughter's face smiled at him from the lock screen, a photo from her 32nd birthday dinner back when she still believed her father was merely a washed-up producer instead of a monster. The first voicemail played automatically. "Dad, I've been thinking about Mom's last days, about what she said about secrets. We need to talk. Please call me back." Vincent deleted it without listening to the others. Whatever Margaret had poisoned their daughter's mind with, whatever breadcrumbs she'd left for Christina to follow, it was too late to clean up now. Some conversations could destroy what little family he had left. Instead, he climbed the stairs to his study, each step feeling like a death march. The room had once been his war room, walls lined with movie posters from his glory days, shelves groaning under the weight of awards that had long since tarnished. Now it felt like a museum exhibit. Vincent Torino's career, 1975 to 2005. Admission free because nobody cares. He pulled down a cardboard box from the highest shelf, his fingers trembling as they worked the tape free. Inside lay the artifacts of his greatest shame, newspaper clippings about Elena's death, police reports he'd bought with campaign contributions to the sheriff's re-election fund, photographs from the night at the Beverly Hills Hotel that had started it all. There was Michael Castellano, at 23, beautiful and burning with ambition, his young face unmarked by the violence he would later master. And there was Elena Vasquez, dark-eyed and defiant, her hand resting unconsciously on the belly that carried Vincent's unborn child. She'd confronted him after the humiliation ceremony, cornering him in the hotel bar with fire in her eyes and her secret like a loaded gun. "I know what you did to Michael," she'd whispered, her voice cutting through the celebration noise like a blade. "But more importantly, I know what you did to me." Vincent had seduced her during her screen test for a film that never got made, promising her a career that would never materialize. When she'd told him about the pregnancy, he'd offered money, connections, anything except acknowledgement. Elena had wanted more than payoffs. She'd wanted him to publicly claim the child, to give up his carefully constructed image of family man and Hollywood royalty. Instead, he'd made her disappear. Now, staring at photographs of the dead, Vincent finally understood the architecture of his destruction. Margaret had contacted Michael, not out of vengeance, but out of mathematics. She'd calculated exactly how much pain was required to balance 35 years of moral debt. The theater tomorrow night wasn't just a trap, it was an equation. His phone buzzed with a new message: "Tomorrow, 8 p.m., Castellano Theater. Come alone, come ready to confess. Christina will be watching." Vincent's blood turned to antifreeze. His daughter would be there to witness his final humiliation, just as Margaret had planned from her deathbed. The symmetry was perfect. He'd destroyed Michael in front of an audience. Now Michael would return the favor with the only witness whose opinion still mattered. The bourbon bottle was empty now, but Vincent felt more sober than he had in decades. Tomorrow night, Vincent Torino's story would finally end where it began, in a theater, before an audience, with the truth burning everything to ash. Margaret had indeed orchestrated the perfect finale. Vincent just prayed his daughter would survive the flames. Vincent stared at the phone screen until the words blurred into meaningless pixels. Christina will be watching. The final piece of Margaret's posthumous chess game, played with surgical precision across decades. His daughter, innocent, brilliant Christina, who still believed her father had merely fallen from grace rather than clawed his way to hell, would witness the complete excavation of his rotted soul. The study felt smaller now, the walls pressing inward like a collapsing star. Vincent walked to the window overlooking the Pacific, watching waves crash against the rocks below with the relentless rhythm of approaching judgment. How many times had he stood here over the years, congratulating himself on his escape from consequence? How many nights had he convinced himself that Elena's death was an accident, that the pregnancy was just bad timing, that destroying Michael Castellano was simply business? All lies. Even in the darkness, especially in the darkness, he could see Elena's face reflected in the glass, young, defiant, demanding the acknowledgement he'd never given. She'd threatened to go public at the worst possible moment, just as he was negotiating the deal that would make him Hollywood royalty. The merger with Paramount, the multi-picture contracts, the respect that had always eluded him, all of it hanging by a thread that a pregnant actress could cut with a single press conference. So he'd cut her first. Not with his own hands. Vincent had always been too sophisticated for such crude solutions. Instead, he'd used Elena's ambition against her, promising a private audition on his yacht off Catalina Island. She'd come alone, desperate enough to believe that pregnancy might actually strengthen her negotiating position rather than destroy it. They'd talked for hours as the boat drifted into deeper waters, Vincent feeding her lies about European co-productions and career opportunities that would accommodate motherhood. When she'd finally understood the truth, that he would never acknowledge the child, never leave his wife, never risk his carefully constructed empire for love or honor or basic human decency, Elena had threatened to swim to shore rather than accept another ride back to harbor with him. Vincent had let her try. The water was cold that night, the currents treacherous, and Elena Vasquez had been a girl from East LA who'd learned to swim in public pools, not Pacific swells. He'd watched her struggle for perhaps 10 minutes before calling the Coast Guard, long enough to ensure their rescue efforts would recover only a body. The official story wrote itself. Ambitious young actress drowns in boating accident, no foul play suspected. The pregnancy never made it into the reports. Vincent's political connections had seen to that. Elena simply vanished into Hollywood's vast cemetery of broken dreams. Another cautionary tale about reaching too high too fast. But Michael Castellano had known Elena, had loved her, Vincent now realized, in the way only the young and doomed can love. When she died a month after his humiliation at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Michael must have done the mathematics that had taken Margaret years to complete. 2 lives destroyed, 2 careers buried, 2 people who'd threatened Vincent Torino's empire, both conveniently dead or disappeared. The phone rang, jarring Vincent from his reverie. Christina's name flashed on the screen like an accusation. His finger hovered over the decline button, but some masochistic impulse made him answer. "Dad?" Her voice sounded smaller than it had since childhood, frightened in a way that made his chest constrict. "I'm at Mom's house, going through her papers. I found something. We need to talk." The words hit him like ice water. "What did you find?" "Letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to someone named Michael." Christina's breathing was uneven, shocked. "Dad, these letters, they're about you. About things you did. Horrible things." Vincent closed his eyes, feeling the last supports of his world crumble away. Margaret's insurance policy, her guarantee that the truth would surface even if her partnership with Michael somehow failed. "Christina, listen to me very carefully. There's one from last year. Mom was dying, and she was still writing to this man, still feeding him information about Elena Vasquez." His daughter's voice cracked on the name. "Who was Elena Vasquez, Dad? And why do these letters talk about her like she was my sister?" The question detonated in Vincent's skull like a depth charge. His vision grayed at the edges as 35 years of carefully constructed reality collapsed into rubble. Christina knew. Margaret had made sure she would know, had orchestrated the revelation with the same methodical precision she'd brought to every aspect of his destruction. "The theater," Vincent whispered, understanding flooding through him like poison. "You're going to be at the theater tomorrow night." He invited me. Michael Castellano said there was something I needed to see, something about Mom's final wishes. Christina's voice hardened with a resolve that sounded terrifyingly familiar. "I'm going, Dad, with or without you, but I think it would be better if we faced this together." The line went dead, leaving Vincent alone with the sound of waves and the weight of 3.5 decades of accumulated sin. Tomorrow night, in a theater named for his greatest victim, Vincent Torino would finally pay the bill that had been accumulating interest since 1987. Margaret had orchestrated the perfect finale. The only question now was whether anyone would survive the final curtain. Vincent sat in the darkness for hours after Christina's call, watching the ocean swallow the moon. The house creaked around him like an old ship taking on water, each sound a reminder of how isolated he'd become. By dawn, he'd made his decision, not about redemption, which seemed impossible now, but about dignity. If this was to be his final performance, he would face it standing up. The drive to the Castellano Theater took him through the heart of Hollywood, past landmarks of his former empire. The Chinese Theater where he'd attended countless premieres. The Roosevelt Hotel where he'd made deals that destroyed careers. Each familiar sight felt like a tombstone marking another death along his path to power. The city looked different in daylight, older, more tired, as if it too was ready for this long story to finally end. The theater stood restored to its 1930s glory, its Art Deco facade gleaming like a jewel among the strip malls and tourist traps. A small marquee announced tonight's showing, Truth in 3 Acts, a retrospective. Vincent parked across the street and watched early arrivals filter through the entrance. Industry veterans he recognized, journalists with recording equipment, and scattered civilians drawn by curiosity about Hollywood's most notorious reckoning. Christina arrived at 7:30, walking with the measured pace of someone approaching a funeral. She wore Margaret's pearls. Vincent recognized them from 20 feet away, and carried herself with the same steel-backed dignity her mother had possessed. When their eyes met across the street, Vincent saw not hatred but something worse. Disappointment so profound it had calcified into resignation. They approached each other like survivors of separate shipwrecks, each carrying salvage from their destroyed lives. "Did you really love her?" Christina asked without preamble. Her voice was steady, but Vincent caught the tremor underneath. "Elena, I mean. Or was she just another transaction?" The question cut deeper than expected. Vincent had spent 35 years convincing himself that Elena meant nothing, that her death was merely an unfortunate necessity. But standing here with his daughter, Elena's daughter too, he realized with crushing clarity, the lie finally crumbled. "I loved the idea of her," he said slowly. "Young, beautiful, talented, completely dependent on my approval. I loved having that power over someone's dreams." He paused, watching Christina's face harden. "That's not the same thing as love, is it?" "No," Christina said quietly. "It's not." They walked into the theater together, father and daughter united by the gravity of approaching truth. The interior had been transformed into something between a courtroom and a confessional. 3 large screens dominated the stage, while the audience sat in the dark like a jury waiting for evidence. Michael Castellano took the stage at exactly 8 o'clock. At 65, he moved with the controlled grace of a man who'd spent decades perfecting the art of patience. His hair was silver now, his face lined but still handsome in the way that suggested depth rather than mere surface beauty. "Good evening," he began, his voice carrying easily to the back rows. "Tonight we're going to watch 3 acts of a story that began in this very theater 35 years ago. A story about power, corruption, and the price of silence." The first screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage from the 1987 Beverly Hills Hotel event. Vincent watched his younger self orchestrate Michael's humiliation with the casual cruelty of a Roman emperor. The second screen displayed Elena's photographs, her screen tests, publicity shots, and finally her morgue photo, the beauty drained away by Pacific saltwater. The third screen remained dark until Michael spoke again. "Act 3 belongs to Margaret Torino," who spent 23 years documenting her husband's crimes while planning this moment. The final screen illuminated with pages of Margaret's handwriting, letters, diary entries, and detailed timelines connecting Vincent to Elena's death. Vincent felt the audience's attention focus on him like a laser. He stood slowly, his joints protesting, and walked toward the stage. This was his moment, not for denial or deflection, but for the truth that had been eating him alive for decades. "My name is Vincent Torino," he said, his voice echoing in the restored theater. "I killed Elena Vasquez and her unborn child. I destroyed Michael Castellano's career. I've spent 35 years running from those truths, and I'm tired of running." The confession poured out of him like poison from a lanced wound. Elena's pregnancy, the yacht, his decision to let her drown rather than face exposure. He spoke for 20 minutes, laying out each detail with the precision of a man who'd rehearsed this moment in nightmares for decades. When he finished, the theater fell silent. Vincent looked at Christina, seeing tears streaming down her face, and felt something crack open in his chest. Not redemption, that was beyond him now, but perhaps the beginning of peace. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though he knew the words were 35 years too late. Outside, the California night waited with infinite patience, ready to receive whatever remained of Vincent Torino when this final act concluded. The waves would keep crashing long after his story ended, washing clean the rocks where Elena Vasquez had once walked, carrying away the last traces of his crumbling empire. Some prices, Vincent finally understood, could only be paid in full